that's fine. We are recording this so that folks that maybe get here a little bit late, they can go back and look at the recording later on. But to start with, just to introduce myself, my name is Bob Shellman, and I'm the co-chair of the NMFWA Bird Conservation Working Group. I'm actually the outgoing chair. And so myself and Jackie Ferrer-Perez are the two acting co-chairs for the working group. So I'm going to pull up the agenda just to kind of show you what we're hoping to accomplish here today. Hopefully everyone can see that. So we're basically going to split today's into two different parts. First part will just be kind of the business meeting portion of the working group. Talk about some of the current initiatives that are going on. Get ready to vote for call for a vote for a new co-chair to fill my position. And then the second half, and we'll have some time for open forum if there's any general questions that for the working group. And then from there, we'll roll into a panel discussion. Hopefully everyone got a chance to watch the pre-recorded presentations that our panel, they're all great presentations. And if you haven't had a chance to go look at them, make sure that you do. But I think the way that we'll work the panel session, a reminder, if you could mute as you come in, that would be great. We'll introduce the panelists, and then we'll lead into a discussion, and we've got a fair bit of time to whatever questions have come up. And then what we'll do is we'll monitor the chat via Pathable. So if you have questions or anything that comes up, make sure that you're putting those into the Pathables. And a big thanks to Zoe, who's helping me herd the cats and help me keep track of the of those messages that come in. And I see that Jackie Ferrer-Perez is here, so welcome, Jackie. And what I'd like to do is, as I said, I'll switch to a different. Change my screen here. Just kind of talk a little bit in general about our working group. As I said, the co-chair positions are 2-year positions, and so myself and Jackie have been managing that for the last year, and I'm outgoing, and so we have a new candidate who's accepted a nomination, and so if you haven't already done so, make sure you go to the poll section in that page in Pathables and click on that. Just in general about our working group, it was chartered back in 2015 and now has well over 200 members. I haven't looked at the latest spreadsheet, but what's happening is as a lot of folks have been participating in this, a lot of folks have been driving over to our website and signing up for work groups. So we're continuing to see those numbers go up, which is really exciting. And we collaborate very closely with the Department of Defense Partners in Flight Group, which is actually the meeting right directly following this. So just jump right over into that, and you'll hear about all the work that's being done on the DoD PIF side. Just talking about some of the ongoing initiatives that we're taking on and kind of continuing to drive forward. One of the ones that was started in 2019 was an initiative from a former co-chair, Alan Schultz. And Alan, if you're on the line, I'll share, if you could just talk real briefly about what the genesis of the project was and what you've seen as far as results. And I'll pull up the spreadsheet so you can speak to that as well.
Okay. Hoping you all can hear me. So basically, these 3 bullets on the screen here was gone. Okay, so
sorry.
The reason we were doing, that's fine, no problem. The reason we were doing it, one of the big drivers and benefits of NMFWA is that installations can learn what other installations are doing and share information both through NMFWA and offline. And we often don't know what our neighbors, even in the same state with other services, may be doing. So as a major mission of NMFWA to bring installations together, we formulated this survey, which is intended to just kind of quickly outline what installation issues are at your installation, what you may see as future issues with birds, all about birds, of course. And so it's this absolutely insane Excel spreadsheet, which is not quite as insane as it looks once you get into it. It's designed to be filled out very quickly with just current information, no data mining and analysis and everything. The idea is an installation manager can just sit down and quickly fill out some of these cells and say what are some of the big issues there at your installation, what you see as future things, what you may want more information about. And then, of course, we'll compile this. The services and DoD are very interested in this as well. So basically, this started and still is a NMFWA exercise. So we created this as a working group project in this working group, and it went out. I've emailed a bunch of people before with this, and as a NMFWA thing, so it's not a data call from the services, it's a NMFWA exercise to compile this survey. After this next round, after this meeting, we'll send out another request for people to fill it out, and whatever we get back, we will turn over to the services, and they will decide what they want to do with it. They may push it out as a kind of a formal data request from the services. It's really good information, and like I said, the main thing for NMFWA is to help us understand what other installations are doing, so that you can see that, hey, you know, so-and-so down the road at installation X has the same issues that I do. And has a contact information for them. So that's an NMFWA mission, and of course the services like it so they can see too what their installations are dealing with and help facilitate funding and resources to tackle the hard issues. So that's basically it. The Excel spreadsheet, I believe, is posted on this link here under Pathable. I will also be, after this meeting, if you sign up for this working group, if you haven't already, I will be sort of old school, not through paper, but I will be emailing out this survey to everybody that's on the working group and asking folks to fill out, send it back to me because I will compile it into a single list of all the installations. So that's basically it. Like I said, you can pull it up now yourself. I think it's under files. And yeah, it looks like it's there. But if not, and like I said, if you sign up for this working group, you'll get an email from me within the next week or so here. And on behalf of the working group, I'm still kind of tracking this thing. So, and just send it back to me. And like I said, if it takes you more than 10 minutes to fill it out, you're doing too much. It's really designed just to be quick, down and dirty, what you know offhand. So that's it. And I'm muting myself again. Any questions?
All right. Thank you, Alan. I appreciate it. So yeah, so you know, that's one of the great things about this this organization and this working group is it's very much grassroots and you know, sharing what's working, what's challenging, and so on with each other. So please take the time and like Alan said, it's in the files tab if you want to take a look at it, and we'll send out an email blast to the group after the fact too, and hopefully you can get that. I filled it out for my installation. It didn't take more than a few minutes, and it's a daunting looking Excel spreadsheet, but don't worry, it's not as bad as it looks. But it has some really great information. We can glean some great information from it. Some of the other ongoing initiatives that you see there, you know, many installations are talking about challenges that they have with recreational birders on their installation, whether that's birders being in places they're not supposed to be, whether they're in restricted areas, or maybe those are opportunities for gathering some of that data if they're out there anyway and they're in an appropriate spot and their recreation is allowed on that installation, making sure that you can capture some of that information and use that to guide some of your natural resource programs. So there's opportunities and challenges both with birders. And so we continue to kind of discuss that and kind of come up with BMPs. There is a eBird white paper that's being developed and still in development that will hopefully be hitting the airwaves soon, with some guidance on how to utilize eBird effectively on military installations. So stand by for that. That's coming from the DoD PIF side. outreach activities, and maybe Jackie, if you want to talk about some of the outreach activities and some of the things that are going on there, you will notice in the files tab, I have links in the files tab for websites that have good outreach opportunities. But maybe Jack, if you want to just take a couple seconds to talk about some of those outreach opportunities. No. Maybe we have some. You might be on mute, Jackie. I'm not sure. There you are.
Am I good?
You're good.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, so we've got National Public Lands Day, which is an excellent opportunity for some of the installations to get access to funding so that they can realize some of their projects. So that's a really great one. It's of course driven with, it's put together with the idea in mind that you would host an event in collaboration with the use of those funds. And so that's a great opportunity to explore. One that's near and dear to my heart, of course, is the Christmas bird count. So here on Fort Hood, we've been doing the Christmas bird count for several years now. And it's been such a great event. It's a great opportunity to reach out to your community and get people involved in the natural resources and avian species. And we can educate them on at-risk species as well as the endangered species on the installation. And it's a great opportunity to leverage partnerships with local Audubon societies and universities. So that's a really great one to take part in, and the link will take you directly to the Audubon site so that you can see how to participate. You do have to register your circle in your area if you don't have one currently. So that takes a bit of a process, and I think they open that opportunity up in about November or October, if I'm not mistaken. So that's that one. And then we have Migratory Bird Day, which is another great one to participate in. And DoD PIP actually has their own section that they do for that too. So if you want to participate either through other means, through the website, or if you want to participate directly with DoD PIP, you can do that as well. Is there any others that I need to touch on? I know that we listed quite a few.
No, I think that's great, Jackie. I think those are the high ones. In the past, we've the installation that I work at has done things with Endangered Species Day and with different and even things with local birding organizations, and whether it's bird walks and so on like that. So we've done some specialty tours and things like that. So I've always been a huge proponent of not only outreach but also looking for opportunities to do what the term inreach with the folks inside the fence line too, with our airmen and sailors and Marines and soldiers and their families that are maybe on station, and so that they have an appreciation. And it's a little bit self-serving in some respects, as if we kind of get some of these younger service folks involved as they move up the chain in their military careers. They'll hopefully have a ethos kind of built in through some of these programs. And of course, obviously, any kind of the kids and childcare centers and so on like that that are on post and so on. Those are opportunities that they're usually happy to have someone come in and do some sort of activity. If you have the desire to do that and not sure how to get started, please reach out to us in the working group. And we have lots of experience with doing those sorts of things, and we're happy to share successes and BMPs for doing those effectively. One of the other things that is really important, and is as I move on in my career, I'm starting to realize that I have data that's just packed on my desk that is still just starting to pile up, and I don't have it put in the proper spot so that when I eventually retire, it'll be there in perpetuity. So utilizing these data repositories with AKN and all the data that we have to make sure that we're memorializing that for the future is a super important initiative that we continue to work to drive. And then the next two bullets are just, that's kind of is what we do is try to provide peer-to-peer assistance. It's kind of what Alan was alluding to with his survey, and what we've been talking about is like, how can we help folks that are either have a challenge that they're trying to address. Maybe they're new to the installation, new to the area. Maybe they could use some support from other installations in the area. Basically trying to avoid reinventing the wheel is kind of the way I see it.
Oh, Bob, if I can mention just, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Absolutely. No, it's
I'll
right.
mention one more thing, just as an FYI / disclaimer. So with the current events with COVID, hosting some of our events were a little more challenging than previous years. And so just keep that in mind if you want to host your own event, whichever one that you'd like to choose from, or maybe all of them. Just keep in mind that we did have to adhere to some CDC guidance in order to successfully execute that in a safe manner. So just a side note.
Thank you, Jackie. Yeah, that definitely had an impact. In fact, that's a great segue into one of my poll questions, which is, did you have any of your outreach opportunities impacted by COVID? I'm just kind of curious if folks had things that were ready to go and then they had to either get postponed or canceled as a result of COVID. We had a number of things that we had to actually push back because of restrictions, as Jackie said. And then the other informal poll question that, while I'm talking about polls, is talking about what of those outreach activities have you participated in? Just kind of curious what people are doing at their various installations. Again, it's informal, it's not scientific. I'm just kind of curious. And then the final thing is Ryan Orndorff brought up at the DoD session yesterday, is they're always looking for good news stories, no matter how big or small, whether those are just going up the chain to the command as so that they know what's going on and what good news stories are going on, whether it's an article in the Fawn or maybe in Natural Selections, wherever it lands. It's good to share that and that all the good work that's being done is recognized up and down the chain. All right. So with that, what I'd like to do is, Kevin Warner, are you on the line? He may not be, or he's muted. So Kevin Warner has graciously accepted a nomination to be the next working chair, working group co-chair. And his bio is up in the file section. So if you haven't had a chance to look at it, he's got a beautiful ferruginous hawk in hand. So it's a beautiful bird, but it kind of gives a little bit of a background. He's certainly qualified to take over the reins as a working group co-chair. So if you could, sometime during this presentation, make sure you go to the poll and give your submission on whether or not you would support the selection of Kevin Warner as the NMFWA Bird Conservation Working Group co-chair. All right. What I'd like to do now, we've got a couple moments, kind of open it up to the floor. If there are any questions, I don't know if anything's come up, Zoe, in the chat that's kind of general to the working group that we can discuss, or if there's anything we can kind of open up, have folks unmute if we need to if they have any questions just in general about the working group before we jump into our panel.
Not that I see yet. There's some topics that may be good to pose to the panel involving MODIS towers and that exciting new technology, at least new in the West for us. So yeah, I will pepper you as we go through. Okay,
excellent. All right, well, let's give it we'll let folks, if anybody has any kind of working group related as far as to the business side of things before we start the panel session. Anybody have any questions about the working group or anything like that we can address from the next couple moments? If not, we'll jump right into the panel session.
And Bob, I was just going to add, I know Kevin is he's driving back from Northern Idaho from some surveys today. So he is listening in. He just doesn't have a microphone available, but I'm sure he passes on that he's excited. All right.
Wonderful. Thank you, Zoe. All right. Well, what I'd like to do then now is just introduce our panel members. And the way that I kind of envision this working is each of the presenters provided me a bio and just kind of a summary slide. So what I'll do is I'll go through and we'll introduce each of the panel members, and then while I'm introducing them, actually probably right after I introduce them, I'll let them speak for just a couple moments on their summary slide, just to kind of refire the synapses, depending on how many cups of coffee you've had so far. You may not remember all the presentations that you listened to last week or watched last week, or maybe you haven't had a chance to, and so this will prime the pump for some questions. But I'm going to start with Steve Albert. Steve is an assistant director at the Institute for Bird Populations, which is a conservation science nonprofit. He works primarily with IBP's bird banding and long-term monitoring networks across North America and Latin America. And one of his primary interests is exploring how research, management, and policy can work together to protect migratory birds through their full annual cycle. So Steve, if you'd like, you can unmute and I'll pop up a slide. Whoa, easy there. There we go. And Steve, you want to just kind of talk to just a moment or two about kind of what your presentation was about?
Sure. Thanks very much. It's really a pleasure to be with everybody today. So a lot of people in DoD and DoD PIF and NMFWA probably know IVP through the MAPS program. A number of years ago, MAPS had a really strong presence on dozens, scores of military bases, and that was backed up by some federal funding. Unfortunately, that funding sunsetted, but a large number of bases have continued to operate the MAP station. So we're really grateful about that, and the MAPS program is still going strong, of course. In addition to that, more recently, we've started other types of population monitoring on some bases, especially Fort Hood, Fort AP Hill, and Fort Custer. And we're trying to combine MAPS data, which is looking at, MAPS is, for those that don't know, MAPS is a passive mist netting and banding of birds to look at the demographics, look at especially productivity and annual survival, trying to figure out what are those things that actually drive population change. But in addition to that, we've started a number of point counts on a couple of these bases. And the really neat thing that we've been able to do with our really pretty brilliant statistical ecologist, Chris Ray, is that we use data, which is looking at and banding of birds to look at the demographic. We use a rangefinder to try to get down to the nearest meter. And with some pretty nice modeling that takes into account things like differences in detectability, time of year, time of day, weather, just some birds are much more vocal and visible and audible than other birds. How loud is their voice, etc. We're able to actually model that into bird densities and we're able to track. It's pretty neat. A lot of just sort of standard point counts that don't use distance estimation. You're able to get good estimates of presence and relative abundance, but it's really hard to translate that into density. So we're kind of excited about some of the statistical modeling that we're doing. And and so we work with different bases and just trying to customize the needs to the base at hand, looking at whether it's sensitive species or just sort of general long-term trends in regard to the types of management that are going on.
Great. Well, thank you, Steve. I appreciate that. What I'd like, the next person I'd like to introduce is Robert Lonsinger. Oh, and before I do that, I have to mention that Steve has had a little bit of excitement this morning. He completely lost power. I got a text from him that he had to drive a mile just to get a message to me that he may not be able to make it. So very excited that his lights came back on and was able to join us. So thanks for getting through that stress there, Steve. So our next panelist is Robert Lonsinger. And Robert, I have to make an apology to Robert in that I was working to get some information from him and I was sending it to an email that didn't have his correct email address. So I apologize for that, Robert. So I do have a bio from him that I pulled from his profile. So I'll read that, which is Robert is a research wildlife biologist with the U.S. Geological Survey at the Oklahoma Cooperative Fish and Wildlife Research Unit. He works with resource managers to investigate wildlife populations and management with a particular focus on assessing population demographics, patterns of occurrence, and genetic health, genetic diversity, and he also works extensively on optimizing monitoring programs with the goals of reducing monitoring costs and increasing the rate of data return without impacting data reliability. So Robert, I stole your cover slide from your presentation, but if you want to just briefly give us a 1 to 2 minute recap of what you did, that would be great. Thank you.
Sure. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can.
Great. Thanks. And thanks, Bob. And sorry, I know we had some communication challenges, but that's okay. I sent a slide earlier, but this will work just fine. So the work that I presented and that hopefully many of you had a chance to look at really focused on looking at subadult golden eagle resource selection. As I'm sure many of you are aware, golden eagles have a relatively long subadult life stage, and so that subadult period is really important for getting recruitment into the breeding class. Across the Western United States, at least, golden eagles are thought to be stable or maybe even declining slightly, but at Dugway and in the Western Utah and the Great Basin Desert system, populations have seemingly declined with occupied territories declining. And so we're really interested in trying to better understand this subadult life stage because that's an area within the golden eagle ecology that has received much less attention. And so we outfitted a number of nestlings with GPS transmitters. I believe we had, top of my head, I think we had about 76 initially, and then somewhere over, close to 50 that actually ended up in the study. These are animals that survived or were still had transmitters that were transmitting data by September of their hatch year. And ultimately, what we found, I think, was quite interesting from multiple perspectives. So first of all, we found that a lot of the patterns, and this seems intuitive, right? A lot of the patterns that we see for adults translated and seem to be similar for subadults. That is, that there was some threshold for elevation, right? So they increased juice up to some elevation and then declined above that elevation. They tended to use areas with more, that were more ridges and flat areas. So things that we expect. But what we also found that was really interesting was that they seem to be using habitats that we might classify as suboptimal habitats to a greater degree than adults. And it looks as though this might be a resource sort of partitioning with territorial adults in the area, and really helps highlight some of the importance of thinking about some of these habitats for golden eagles that we don't think of as being optimal habitats. So for example, in the Great Basin, we might think of shrublands, which support a high density of jackrabbits, as being really important for golden eagles, but this sort of demonstrates that it's equally important to think about these open woodland habitats, which might support this, the subadult life stage, which is necessary to sort of backfill that adult breeding class. So I'll leave it at that, and happy to take any questions when we get to that point, and thanks for having me.
Thank you, Robert. Appreciate it. And Jackie, if you would you mind introducing our next presenter?
Of this year's Natural Resource Conservation Communication Award for promoting public awareness. So awesome for them. And so since the spring of 2016, Charlie Plimpton has worked on multiple projects involving mission sensitive species on the installation. He's a graduate of the University of Rhode Island with a Bachelor of Science in Wildlife and Conservation Biology. During his time on Fort Hood, he has helped survey the health and status of grassland birds and their habitats, with a particular focus on at-risk species. His team is currently conducting surveys on northern bobwhite occupancy and detectability. Further projects will hopefully focus on other species of concern, such as the Sprig's pipit and the burrowing owl. In addition to avian research, he and his team conduct pollinator research, provide training and support for the installation's Natural Resources Management Plan migratory bird feedback guidance, and participate in many outreach events throughout the year. And with that, I'll give Charlie the floor.
All right, thank you, Jackie and Bob. I'm happy to be here to talk a little bit today about our newly implemented moon survey project that we began last year. On Fort Hood and most places, actually, there's very limited information regarding nocturnal avian species. We have a lot of really great data on a lot of other bird species from point counts and other projects going on, but there were a lot of data gaps with nocturnal bird species. So one of the goals of this project was to fill some of those gaps in data and kind of learn more about the population status of a lot of those species and where they occur on the installation, and see if any future research might be needed for any of those species that we detect. So we implemented moon surveys, which is also called the monitoring of owls and nightjars. And basically we set up transects across the installation with survey points where we listened and used playbacks for target species. And we recorded any avian species that we heard while listening. We found that there were a lot of issues with noise, particularly helicopters were a big issue, especially at night. We had the option of doing surveys either in the evening or in the early morning, and there was far more noise disturbance at night than in the morning. And Chuckwill's widow and eastern screech owl were the two species that we recorded the most. But we also had a lot of recordings of species that weren't thought to be as abundant, like common poorwill in specific locations on the installation. And so we're going to try and continue these surveys just to see how, if we can detect any changes in long-term trends and see if any future research might come about. So.
All good, Charlie?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. And so for more information, if you want to read up on what they're doing here for the Northern Bobwhite monitoring, you should check out the most current edition of Natural Selections. Has a really well-written article there by Charlie. So with that, we'll go to the next presenter, John Macy, and he also conducts research at Fort Hood. In his current role, he is a lead Goldencheek Warbler biologist, and in his career, he has amassed an extensive experience working on Army installations with previous work at Fort Benning and Fort Stewart, Georgia. He obtained his bachelor's in science and master's degree at Stephen F. Austin State University and is currently pursuing a PhD at Texas A&M University. John specializes in protecting species, population ecology, protected species, population ecology, and habitat restoration. And with that, I will let Mr. John Macy take the virtual stage.
Well, thank you very much, Jackie, and everybody joining us today. For this research, our first objective is to determine if geolocators have an impact on survival and breeding behavior for goldencheeks. And second, we will document migration routes and overwinter periods and timing and duration of each to examine to what extent they are used in protected areas. And lastly, we will ultimately examine migratory connectivity. And so far, our preliminary results, migration data suggests that some wintering locations extend beyond the known range, and our results have assisted our counterparts in Mexico find new overwintering locations. And geolocators appear to have minimal impact on survival, return rate, pairing success, and fledgling success, and should help pave the way for research on similar sized birds. And migration routes are variable, and timing may be associated with environmental conditions and or age. And lastly, northern study sites appear to migrate further distances and spend longer durations during migration, during fall migration. That's
Great, thank you, John. And our final panelist is Pete Johnson. And so for those of you who don't know Pete lives in Jacksonville, Florida, and works as a senior biologist and project manager for LG2 Environmental Solutions, which is a full-service environmental consulting, natural resources, and cultural resources firm based in Jacksonville, Florida, Savannah, Georgia, Norfolk, and Atlanta. And over his 25-year career, Pete has worked in both the public and private sectors with emphasis on wetland and aquatic habitat related projects and studies. His work has been supported by a strong background in aquatic sciences gained through a degree in limnology from the University of Central Florida and experience working as a field biologist mainly in Florida and the eastern US. His expertise has been applied to many types of natural resource related projects such as wetland and upland habitat characterization, wetland delineation and permitting, botanical surveys, wildlife surveys, listed species surveys, habitat restoration, NEPA analyses, interim updates, NRCS wetland reserve plan of operation development, invasive species management, and general habitat management. Outside of work, Pete enjoys birding, cycling, and going to dog agility competitions with his wife and 4-legged kids. He is active in the Duval Audubon Society and currently serves as a sanctuary manager for the Crosby Sanctuary, a 500-acre nature preserve near his home in Jacksonville. So Pete, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Bob. I'm happy to be here today with you, and most of you, I hope, have reviewed the presentation in its entirety, so I'll just summarize it here for you. We looked at 3 naval outlying landing fields in Corpus Christi, Texas, for the Navy, for NAVFAC Southeast, and they contracted us to do these bird surveys. Mostly they titled it as a migratory bird survey, but it was really a comprehensive bird survey throughout the 4 seasons for a period of 1 year. And basically it was from 2018, late 2018 through late 2019. And one of our biggest factors, keys to our success with the survey, we have some biologists, and including myself, that are good bird identifiers and surveyors, but we wanted to make sure that we hired some local expertise. So we were able to bring in some local bird experts from the Corpus Christi area and plant experts to help with the habitat survey. And one of the main things that the Navy wanted us to do was to develop a comprehensive bird checklist for each of the 3 outlying fields, which we did in cooperation with Gene Blacklock, who is a local expert from that area. And he helped us develop a checklist that included kind of like what you would see for like a birding checklist that would include all known and potential species and their presence, likelihood during each of the 4 seasons. There was a slide in my presentation that kind of showed one of the checklists. If anybody has any questions about it, you can email me. I can send you copies of it, examples and whatnot. Anyway, so some of our notable findings were that we did not find any federally listed bird or plant species on any of the 3 facilities, which was kind of surprising. But what we did find was quite a few quote unquote sensitive species and state listed species. So there was quite a bit of species that are actually listed, but just not federally listed. I can't think of any examples of them right off the top of my head right now, but anyway, so part of the habitat survey involved invasive plants, trying to identify which plants and where they were on these facilities, which we did, and we created some maps, and we also provided recommendations on how they can address these invasive plants. One of the facilities had quite a large infestation throughout of invasive guinea grass, which is very problematic because it kind of mixes with everything else and it's really hard to get rid of. But along with that, there was a really interesting habitat on this facility, Goliad, with great lead tree, which is apparently a native lead tree species to South Texas and Mexico that provides quite a bit of good habitat for migratory, neotropical migratory warblers and other species that are attracted to the insects that feed on the flowers of these trees. So we were able to identify that and make them aware of that resource for the birds, that important bird resource. And some of the challenges we had were, well, a lesson that we learned, and we kind of knew this coming in, was to work with local bird and plant experts, because South Texas is a very, very diverse area. So we wanted to have locals that were very knowledgeable in the flora and fauna I did not mention, I mentioned in the presentation, Jean Blacklock was our bird expert and Mary Ellen Vega was our plant expert. The other thing was aircraft noise, weather, and access made it a little bit difficult to carry out some of the point count surveys. So we came up with some workarounds for that, including working on weekends and things like that when the planes weren't flying. And then also, as part of this survey, it wasn't really integrated into the plan or the budget, but in the future, we would recommend that anybody that does this type of survey use the Avian Knowledge Network and integrate that for any of their surveys. And with that, I think that's all I have for the summary. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Pete. So what I'd like to do now is I think we'll just open it up to panel questions. Again, if you have questions for the panel, if you could put them into Pathables. As a reminder, we are continuing to we're recording this so that it'll be up later, and we'll also be able to take a look at any of the chat, in chat. If there's any hanging chads, we can deal with those after the fact as well. Zoe, is there anything that would kick off our panel discussion?
Yeah, I think this is just a really good general question that was just asked in the Pathable app that I think could be open to all of the panelists. Curious whether any bird monitoring efforts on military installations have linked declining or increasing trends in bird populations. He's specifically asking in reference to environmental compliance documents like EAs and EISs and good references that we can use throughout that for impacts of military activities on birds. So I see that Alan had a response to that. Alan, do you want to speak to your response involving red-cockaded woodpeckers?
I don't really need to speak to it. I just commented that the red-cockaded woodpecker was actually a bit of a study, but monitoring showed that at least on most installations here, a lot of the training impacts were not there. And so the restrictions about what you can do inside of colony areas around the trees and around the nests and such were lifted because of that monitoring and study. So it was a success story for training and conservation that we could expand training and do a lot more on the ground training without the restrictions. So good success story on that one.
John?
Not to say that there aren't things that won't impact the bird. A lot of what we had restricted, we found did not impact.
Thank you, Alan. John, did you have anything? I mean, what about with the Goldencheek with the Goldencheek Warbler? Has there been any changes? I know that it's been change in listing status, but have any of the installations there seen any changes in their ability to train?
Well, actually, for the Goldencheek, all training restrictions were lifted in 2015 on Fort Hood. So that's because of proactive conservation measures and everything else. But actually, if you look over the last 20 years or so, the Goldencheek population on Fort Hood has actually increased because of the military and Department of Defense's rules and regs. And in 2015, we actually found out that training restrictions were not warranted for the Goldencheek.
I can also add that we've been doing our point counts and density estimations on Fort Bragg for 4 years because I think, as a lot of you guys know, they do a lot of management for red-cockaded woodpecker, which is very management intensive species, and we're finding that that the species that we're monitoring, we have about 50 species of birds that we've been able to have robust enough data to model their trends, and they appear relatively stable. The fort is doing a really good job of managing the southern yellow pine habitat, but also it's important to look to maintain those non-southern yellow pine areas, to just keep the diversity. Start monitoring some of the non-southern yellow pine areas. They have some really nice grasslands associated with drop zones in other areas, but they attract a really nice suite of grassland birds. So in addition to the managed areas, it's important also to keep up, with the not necessarily heavily managed area. But yeah, overall, the Fort is doing a great job with their replicated woodpecker management and keeping habitat for other species.
Bob, I'd like to add something real quick just to kind of dovetail off of that. If you're interested in further NEPA guidance, I think it would be an excellent question. You may have an opportunity to bring that up during the DoD PIF meeting.
Great, thanks, Jackie. I have a question before we go back in. Something kind of came into my mind. I work in an installation that's much more of a postage stamp than some like places like Fort Hood and Fort Bragg. I have a measly 5,000 acres, so it's a tiny. As DoD installations go, it's a pretty small installation. But what I found is that I didn't realize how much I depended upon volunteers to do a lot of the work that I get done on a year-to-year basis until COVID hit, and then base restrictions didn't allow folks to come on board. And as I was looking at some of the presentations and watching some of the presentations, particularly when it comes to the work that Charlie, that you're doing with the nocturnal surveys, and then John with the transmitters, I know you have a pretty large workforce. How did you deal with that with this work, or with your work that's ongoing, and how are you planning on addressing that moving forward?
Well, for the Goldencheek Warbler, we actually train our crew for about a month. So volunteers is very difficult to do all the work that we do, just because the training is so intense. And what we have done is we have collaborated with 4 other locations. So those people that are basically working on the geolocator project are biologists. So they have to show proficiency in front of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to be able to deploy safely a geolocator. So volunteers for us for our project here is relatively slim, just because it requires such a technical expertise.
Yeah, it's similar for our project as well. We try to utilize volunteer effort as much as we can, but as John mentioned, sometimes the training can just be a little bit too involved, depending, also when you rely on volunteers, a lot of times they can't devote enough time to the project, or they just don't have enough experience. But we have other outreach projects throughout the year where we like to get volunteers involved, and also the Christmas bird count. In the past, we've had a lot of volunteers come out and help, but with COVID this year, we really had to slim that down and encourage people to kind of help out from home if they're within the circle. So trying to find those other means of remote participation was kind of our goal this year.
Great, thank you. So is there anything else? I've got a whole list of questions, but if there's anything in the chat, we can go to that.
Yeah, the chat's going wild. So I have a question for Steve from Rich Fisher. Well, actually, it's more of a comment. He said, IVP is a great partner, and we appreciate all the work you do to support migratory bird conservation and mission sustainment on our installations. So well done. And then Christina Witter says, hi, Small World, Steve, good to see you. Or John Macy. Can you explain, John Macy asked Steve, can you explain how you model a density estimate without using a distance component just from detections?
Yeah, it's really, it's difficult, if not impossible, to do that. You really need the distance estimation, just given all the different factors that go into detecting a bird. That I sort of hinted at before, but from the phenology of different birds. Some birds call earlier in the season, some birds call later. But the most important one is the distance. We don't a lot of point count methods use bands. Whether you hear it within less than 50 meters or 50 to 100 or greater. We use rangefinders, and we try to get, and we actually make all our surveyors pass a test too to make sure they're proficient enough to identify birds by song and call. But if you can get the detections down to down to the meter level, then it makes it much easier to figure out how many birds are actually out there. So yeah, really hard, if not impossible, to do without distance estimation.
And then I have a question for Charlie. This is from Gregory Lee. Was the avoidance of areas with significant levels of artificial light considered in your transect route development?
It wasn't considered beforehand making the transects, but that's something that we're going to look at, possibly when analyzing the data a little bit more extensively. Yeah, because some of the transects, the ones that were a little closer to residential areas, they might have had some issues with that effect.
Charlie. This one's for Pete, from Douglas Schultz. I saw you guys were chatting in the chat box, but I think it's a good one to say to the whole group. What is done with any bird incidental observations that you make in between your survey points, especially if there are species you have not observed at any of your points?
Okay, yeah, I made an attempt to answer that on the in the chat, but yeah, we definitely recorded incidental observations between the points, and there was quite a lot of them, as you would expect. And we just basically we noted them, and we put them on the lists of bird species that we observed throughout the project. But we also noted them as incidentals in the report, but we did not use those in the actual point count data. So that's basically it.
I have another question for Steve. This is from Arlene Arnold. She's asking, I'm really curious if you had enough detections of individual species to calculate densities. If not, did you group species together, and how did you determine which species were appropriate to group together?
Yes, I did. I just answered that one in the chat. I just hit send as you started asking me. Yeah, at Fort Bragg, after about 4 years, we're able to model over 50 species, 51 species that we have enough data on to model densities. And no, we didn't group species. We did them all individually. But over the course of the 4 years, I think it's about 40,000 detections or something like that. So we've got a really nice data set going, and a pretty strong confidence in the density data.
We just had a really great question from Melissa Booker for the whole panel. Is anyone else dealing with a conservation reliant taxa whose decline is unrelated to military training or appears, I think in her case, appears drought driven, but that could result in jeopardy due to really low population numbers?
I could give sort of a general answer, but that just sort of it's going to be a shameless plug for the MAPS program. And one of the difficulties that of course we run into is for migratory birds, they only spend about a third of the year on military installations in North America, and the other 2/3 of the year in migration or on their wintering grounds in Latin America. So what the MAPS program tries to do is look at vital rates of productivity and survival to find out where in the annual cycle that population is, and if it's something, we can gain a strong inference on whether it's something in the breeding grounds. In other words, whether those breeding areas on the installations in North America are most driving the population, or whether it's something on the wintering grounds that you can do the best management in the world on the breeding grounds, and you're not going to have any effect on the decline of the population if something's going on in the wintering areas. So it just kind of highlights the importance of working together with with Latin American partners and sort of all the great work that Keith Hobson with Stable Isotopes and Kristen Ruig, who's a partner of ours with using genetics to sort of link populations. It's such important work. That's the technologies, the new technologies, and all the tracking technologies that people have talked about. The geolocators and things like that. So, yeah, it's really, really, really important, and it's a big problem, or a big question anyway. I should say, not a problem.
This is John. Just to build on what Steve said, that is one reason why we're using the geolocators for the Goldencheek. It's because like just like he said, Fort Hood can be doing everything right, but if they're clear cutting the forest down in Oaxaca, Mexico, and we don't know where these birds go to, we cannot prove as a military installation that it's not what we're doing here. It's happened on the other part of the life of their life cycle. So that's one reason we're wanting to examine the migratory connectivity, paths, and the extent to what they use protected areas.
Thanks, John. I'm gonna throw a general question out that I think probably each of you mentioned in your presentations that you had various challenges with, is just coordinating with the military operators and timing of when you did your work based on that. And so maybe I'll shoot this one, the first question to Robert. With the Eagle work that you did too, what did you find as far as, or do you have any tips or BMPs or lessons learned as far as like coordinating with operators that the working group could maybe hear, and maybe start with you, and then we'll just kind of see if the other panel members have anything to add to that.
Okay, can you guys hear me? I'm having a little bit of bandwidth issue on my end.
No, you're loud and clear to me, Robert.
Okay, well, my answer is going to be really unsatisfying. Sorry, and the reason it's going to be unsatisfying is because the fieldwork component of this was largely carried out by Steve Slater and folks with Hawk Watch International. So this was a large collaborative project. I think I saw that Keely was on. I don't know if Keely is able to chime in, but if she is, she might be able to provide a little bit more information here. I mean, I certainly know working on Dugway in the past with other critters, the coordination with the installation was critical, but I'm sure there were some challenges with the Eagle work that I'm unaware of. So I know, like I said, entirely unsatisfying answer. We'll see if Keely maybe can add something if she's listening, but if not, I'll pass it off to others. Sorry about that.
Hi, Rob and Bob, I am on. So the question, sorry, I was kind of like moving around a little bit. So I missed part of the question, but it was basically about coordinating and working with the military itself and working on like the avoiding impacts to the eagles, or?
Yeah, well, the question is just kind of a more general one. Did you have, in your coordination, to work with the operators at Dugway, and did you have any lessons learned, any aha moments, any tips or BMPs that you can do that you can maybe share that maybe really helped drive your research to be successful?
Oh, sure. Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that we do that really helped us out immensely is that I actually attend a weekly scheduling meeting with all of the operators at Dugway. And when we have Eagle nests go active, we follow currently the Fish and Wildlife Service West Valley Field Office guidelines that recommend putting up an activity restriction buffer around the nest. And so I attend that weekly meeting. Right now, obviously, it's all virtual, but I provide maps to all the operators, and then I work with them. So we've actually developed a really good relationship with all the different players at Dugway with the testing and training operations. And we've also, Robbie Knight, our program manager, has worked with the Fish and Wildlife Service to get a couple of permits to continue our operations So the military in a couple of locations. So we've managed to get permits. I guess they're take permits, but we have a couple of nests that are in military operating areas that are less than ideal locations for the eagles to nest and have a huge impact. And so we went to the Fish and Wildlife Service and said, hey, can we get a take permit for these areas? And provided them, a bunch of information and continuing the monitoring. And overall, we've been able to help the military continue to get their mission accomplished, but also proactively protect the eagles on Dugway. And mostly, I think, take home message of that is communication. So being actively involved in the installation, knowing the operators out there, like developing these personal relationships with them. I think hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, Keely, we had a follow-up in the chat from Russ Lawrence. He was wondering how big your buffers were.
Oh, yeah. Hi, Russ. So we use the half-mile buffer guidelines from the Fish and Wildlife Service field office. And we're actually, we have one of our cooperators, our contractors is working on I think like a document that kind of discusses how we chose those guidelines and kind of the implications of that.
Thank you, Keely. Did any of the panel members have anything to add to that discussion?
Yeah, sure, Bob. I can say a few things about access coming from a contractor's point of view. Definitely communication and early coordination with all of your environmental staff to help get the escorts necessary to get you out onto these, in our case, outerlying landing fields, but also being flexible. Try not to, think that you're going to adhere to a regular schedule is probably a good idea. Trying to just, be able to go out there when the time is right and and trying to coerce your clients, if you will, that they need to come, especially because we had to have escorts on a lot of these surveys, trying to coerce them into going out on the weekends. So that was a challenge, but I've found that most Navy staff, environmental staff are very accommodating and willing to help you have a successful project. So, but early coordination and good communication and a little bit of a constant contact or prodding to get, if you will, to get the escorts and access authorizations necessary.
And Christina Witter is echoing in the chat that yes, flexibility is key. She said count on some weekend work potentially.
Thank you, Christina.
Yeah, as someone who's still trying to get his rail surveys done, I've been challenged with weather and small arms range restrictions, so I can totally feel that pain. It's you got to have that flexibility. Anybody else have anything else that they wanted to add for that? Anything else from the chat right now, Zoe? I've got another question.
Yeah, we had a general question on timing as well that I think fits into this conversation. Scott asked, is nighttime work easier than daytime work due to the typically daytime activity on military installations? At least at our installation, it depends. So again, that coordination, flexibility, communication is all going to be the same regardless of daytime or nighttime, and being very aware of what your military activities are and your scheduling will help you immensely in scheduling out your surveys.
Yeah, I'll add to that too. A lot of our surveys, for this project took place at night or in the early morning, and it's not necessarily any easier because as I mentioned, we didn't realize how much helicopter training did occur at night. And in the early morning, there was virtually no training going on. But at night, it seems that there was still a significant amount of training, whether it be by air or on the ground too. So.
Speaking of that, Charlie, Jacob McCumber had a comment for you. Great work and presentation. They have been doing very similar surveys at Camp Edwards in Maryland, as Eastern whippoorwill is a state listed species. Been very helpful by showing long-term stable trends during significant increase in habitat restoration work, and demonstrating Camp Edwards is the best location for that species. And he said helicopters were a surprise constraint for us. Luckily, Army Aviation has been very helpful with scheduling. So sounds like you're not alone in that. I have oh, go ahead, Jackie.
I'd like to add to the training aspect of that. So here on Fort Hood, and I'm not sure how it is with other installations if they use the same programs, but there's a program called RIFMIS. Don't ask me what the acronym stands for, but we work collaboratively with range operations, and they're very supportive in letting us know when the majority of the bulk of the training is going to happen, what time of day. We've had the most luck around training holidays that are scheduled in advance. And we've also had a lot of luck with, for instance, with our Christmas bird count. We wanted to be able to have access to some of the more sensitive areas on the installation, and that was really difficult to accomplish whenever there's training going on. So the good thing about that is that we were able to schedule the Christmas bird count consistently on a day when we know that they're away for the entire almost 4 weeks during the Christmas holiday. So that's a really good time to do work if that coincides with the kind of research you're doing. But I'm pretty sure that everybody is tracking that working collaboratively with Range Operations Office is pretty much the only recourse that we have. So that's all.
Liz provided the acronym for RIFMIS. Thank you, Liz. It's Range Facility Management Support System. Alan suggested carrying your ID. I think that's a really good idea, just so that everyone kind of knows who you are. We've started putting big stickers on our trucks that we're environmental, so we're not the public, that type of thing.
Yes. We also carry radios with us too, so that we can be in constant communication with the Range Operations Office, and we can hear the radio traffic. So if there's any changes that aren't expected, we know in real time.
I've got a question about the work that Pete, that you did at the outlying landing fields. You talked a lot about in the habitat, and one of the questions I always have about invasives and how they affect habitat, which then affects the birds, is that where's the source of those invasives? Are those invasives that you're seeing, that you saw at those outlying landing fields, the same on outside the fence line, or is that different inside and outside? It's one of the questions we always get asked in our metrics is, how does our habitat compare to that outside the fence line? So I was just curious if is that a biosecurity thing where, some of those invasives are being brought in by military activities, or is that just the way it is in that part of the world?
Yes. The surrounding properties were mostly infested with the same invasive species that were on the military properties, including, surprisingly enough, or maybe not so surprising, Brazilian pepper, which is moving into South Texas quite a bit. We have a lot of it here in Florida, but so yeah, basically it's just a snapshot of the surrounding environment of what invasives we're finding. We found in this case on the military lands. But at least they now have a better idea of where to, what species and they need to work on to treat and keep in check if they can. In South Texas, there's so many invasives that they're probably a fairly permanent fixture if it's just a matter of keeping them at a level that's acceptable to for the species that you have. Try to keep them, their habitats supporting them.
Keely had just one more point to add to the coordination with range that I think is a really good point. She was stressing outreach, educating your installation folks on the work that you do, the time of year that you do it, and that should help with understanding the importance of why we need to do that work, and then the importance that sometimes it does need to happen at certain times in certain locations. So I think that's a really good point, Keely. Thank you.
Oh, and to add to that, one thing that's not often thought of, and I don't think that every installation has to mitigate this, but we do have a pretty extensive hunting program on the installation. So we also work with our MWR folks to make sure that whenever we go out into these areas, we're doing it safely, and they're aware that we're out there. And so there's a lot of co-use going on the installation as well.
Charlie, I have a selfish question to ask you. As someone who probably would like to, by the way, that's probably the coolest acronym that I've ever heard in the military is the MOON acronym. It's pretty cool. Whoever came up with that should get a service coin. That's pretty cool.
Fort Hood and their acronyms are spot on.
But as someone who definitely does not, at my installation, I definitely do not know the night shift as well as I should. And so I was kind of inspired by looking at what you're doing there at Fort Hood and trying to utilize some in a smaller subset of what you guys do. Is that something that I don't know if you've written up any kind of white paper or have any kind of anything that's kind of describes what you've done? Maybe be willing to share the methodologies or the data sheets or anything like that so anybody who wants to do kind of the night shift surveys at their installation could basically benefit from, kind of stand on your shoulders and use kind of that as a template for doing work on their installation.
Yeah. So the methodology we kind of used was, it was based off of surveys that were done in Illinois through the University of Illinois. And they utilize a volunteer effort throughout the state for these surveys. And we kind of took that protocol and adapted it to Fort Hood. We haven't really written up anything specific yet, but we might try and do that in the next year. And yeah, it's not too much different than day surveys. It's just it's harder on the schedule, in my opinion. Especially if these surveys run a couple hours into the night, and you can't start them until 30 minutes after sunset. So then you're looking at a pretty late night. And if you have other like us, we have other projects going on where it requires us to get up early in the morning for early bird surveys. It's quite a turnaround if you're doing a lot of other work, but yeah.
Got another question for Charlie. This is from Matt Kleitch. Has Fort Hood or any other installations considered the use of autonomous acoustic monitoring units for nocturnal birds?
Yeah, we did consider that when first developing this project. We decided to try this first. And we might look into that in the future. We figured that since Fort Hood is so large that we'd be able to cover more ground by doing these surveys, because if you wanted to get a fairly good representation of the whole installation, you'd probably need a lot of those units. Although it would, as I just mentioned, it would help with the schedule. You wouldn't have to necessarily be out there to collect the data. You could place them and then collect them at a later date. So it might be something we utilize in the future as a kind of way of easing the schedule and not having to be out there at odd hours.
Well, we have an award winner in the chat box saying that they use acoustic recorders. Martin, did you want to speak to your acoustic experience on your base? Maybe he is not. No microphone. That's okay. Thanks, Martin. This is a good time to plug that if there's anyone on in the call or in the chat box that maybe has presented some interesting information you want to ask more about, you can use the Pathable app and find their profile in that People tab, and you can get in contact with them. You can set up private meetings, get their emails, so you guys can continue this conversation even after the session's ended, after the meeting's ended. So keep that in mind.
Can I just say one thing? This is Pete. With our point counts, we scheduled some of them to start before sunrise, and that was instrumental in picking up a lot of, in South Texas, common Paracos. That was very common on a lot of these open airfield areas.
I've got a question for the panel too, and if anybody has any input, but what with the data, going back to what I said kind of in the business section, is how are you dealing with the data set? Like, where are you housing it? How did you, and if you have a place, how did you set that up?
Well, I'll go ahead and start. So for our data, we compile it using Excel usually, and we have our database for all the data that we collect. I am actually signed up for the Avian Knowledge Network training this week with the hopes of utilizing that for our data, because we've amassed quite a bit of point count data over the years too. So yeah, I'm hoping to be able to use that for our data.
This is John. That's a very good question. For the Goldencheek, we have multiple data sets. The first one is FAMOUS, which we house, which is access-oriented database, where we store the things like return rates, locations, banding information. But for this project here, data set management is quite large. We have Excel spreadsheets, we have the FAMOUS software, we have GIS, we have the R data. So I have folders within folders over the last four years. But once we analyze this stuff, we will make the data set public. But first, we got to get done with everything.
Oh, to add to what John was saying, he's being extremely modest about the FAMOUS program. It's incredible and very extensive and detailed. I mean, it links individual birds to their nests and their nesting success, their band number, and just additional information about the activities within their territory. And it can be exported in a manner where you can see it, in GIS, so that you can get a better picture of what's really going on within each territory. But I'm excited about everybody using the Avian Knowledge Network potentially in the future, because I think that'll give us a better idea of what's going on across the board with DoD. And to go back to what was mentioned earlier about species detections, or detecting that species are in decline, not necessarily related to training. I think that the more use of the avian, as we get more users on the Avian Knowledge Network, we'll be able to see a bigger picture of those occurrences.
Jackie or Liz, I think this is a common resistance, or at least a fear of the AKN that Jake McCumber wrote in the chat. We're hoping to get our bird data into AKN, but daunted by having 26 years of old data, so many spreadsheets to try to convert for upload. What sort of advice, or what would you be your response to that?
Yeah, good question. Once a protocol is in the system, so if you follow the same protocol throughout those 26 years, once that's in the system and we set up the fields, it's an easy bulk upload. So come talk to me and we can see your data and discuss what may need to be done to get it in shape. But it's actually not as daunting as most people think once we get it all set up. And then that makes future uploads or data entry super easy from that point forward.
Thanks, Liz.
You're welcome.
I have a question if there aren't any others that you need to go to. So this is for everybody. I'm curious to know how people prioritize the management of at-risk species on your installation when you have several. Great.
I can speak to that just from my personal installation. It's a lot of it's based on what my regulatory partners are prioritizing. You know, if I see that if it's a species that's in bad shape from either my state or federal partners' point of view, that kind of becomes a higher priority. And then also, if there's anything at my particular installation, I'm fortunate and I don't have a lot of, there's not a big nexus with military mission with my listed species. So I can kind of do that. But I think in another way to look at it is what's the biggest risk to the military mission? You know, that would be my highest priority, but I'd be happy to hear what other people think and how they would chime in.
We have a couple chats. Scott says it's a dice roll. Melissa has a good point that it's based on potential impact to the mission. So if you're able to do a cost benefit to the mission, that might be a good way to start your prioritization list.
This is Pete. I'll just say that my goal as a surveyor and contractor is to help you folks identify these at-risk species and maybe help get the ball rolling and give some recommendations to how to conserve them and protect them. So that's what I've been trying to do, is a more thorough job of just identifying, because there's a lot of them out there, a lot of at-risk species that need more attention.
One thing that we do is look at the state wildlife action plan and see what the commission has as priorities too, which may be slightly different than ours, and how we can contribute to that. Like in our case here in North Carolina, you know, nightjar conservation was a big thing, which we weren't really focusing on as much here, but in the state wildlife action plan, they identify that pretty strongly. And so as a partner to those activities, we want to look at what their interests are as well.
And Jake in the chat, working with Sykes partners and species of greatest conservation need, looking at guilds more than individual species to target management projects. So wherever those Venn diagrams of management needs start to overlap, those seem like a really nice priority where you could get guilds of species rather than just individual benefit.
Hey, did you get the slides for the DevArcEMR?
Tammy, was that a question for us? Don't.
Between our calls.
Right. Did anyone else have anything to add? Thanks, Tammy. Sorry. Did anyone else have anything to add about prioritization? Okay.
I just 1 second. So I think in the next session for DoD PIF, maybe that would be a good question to bring up again, because we've been doing a lot of work. We have a working group on DoD PIF that specifically focus on mission sensitive species management. So if anybody's looking for any guidance on how to prioritize management of those species, tune into the DoD PIF session and maybe we can address any questions.
I had a question for Rob. And hopefully everyone was able to go and watch the pre-recorded presentation. Can you sum up what you think the major implications for military installations are based on your findings? Especially since I'm one of those installations that have those age classes of golden eagles hanging around.
Yeah, you certainly are. I mean, you were in that same area where we were doing all the eagle monitoring many years ago down there in southern Idaho. So yeah, I mean, what are the major implications? So I mean, a lot of the talk today has been about point counts and things like that. You know, we did something a little bit different with GPS and some adult golden eagles. You know, I think probably, so there were two things, and one of them I didn't really mention in the quick summary this morning, but two things that really stood out. One was that we saw this use of suboptimal, what we might think of as suboptimal habitat. And really, I guess the message there is that with the invasion of cheatgrass into many of these areas, increased fire frequency, which everyone, you know, in that region is really knowledgeable about. I think it's really important for this subadult age class for managers to think about trying to maintain some of this open woodland habitat or try to maintain it. And that's kind of contrary to a lot of management in that landscape, right? A lot of times we think of these as like juniper encroachment areas, and we're thinning that stuff out, and for good reason. Oftentimes sage grouse and other sagebrush obligate species, things like that. But I think, you know, fire management in these woodlands is important to help maintain some of these woodlands. The other thing that was really interesting that came out was the sort of increased use around roads and transmission lines in the winter, which we don't really see as a pattern with adults in the same way. So, you know, this essentially, you know, we believe is strongly related to them scavenging. So scavenging might be a really important component of subadult golden eagle sort of survival in the winter. Now, how do we actually manage that? I'm not 100% certain that we can manage that well. But at least it's important to recognize that that's one of the areas. So
thanks, Rob.
I don't know if that helps, Zoe.
Yeah, we'll see. Liz did add in the chat that, Rob, it's about time you ditched mammals and jumped on the bird wagon.
Yeah, it's actually a little bit uncomfortable. No offense to everybody in the group, but you know, this is really well outside my wheelhouse in terms of the tax that I typically work with. But you know, I'm more on I keep waiting for the questions on modeling and things like that. You know, I wanted to jump in on the density estimation thing because that's where I get excited. So.
Cool. Bob, do you have any more questions?
I don't have any kind of preloaded questions in my mind, but I was thinking more about of what Rob was just talking about these anthropomorphic impacts on these species. And you know, obviously there's a lot of challenges with towers and with transmission lines and collisions and electrocutions and so on. That I don't know if it maybe as a you know, it continues to be a challenge, and it's one that I deal with. I deal more with collisions more than I do with power lines than I do electrocutions. But I guess it's kind of amusing that it's a musing that I have, or a thought that I have, that those continues to be such a challenge, and I know that it's something a lot of us are working on and trying to figure out how to minimize those impacts. But it's just fascinating that, especially with research like you did, Rob, where you're seeing that they're partitioning resources and kind of using those, kind of taking advantage of some of those anthropomorphic features, to kind of make it through the year. Yeah, it's just, I guess it's just an interesting thing that we all just deal with, is that they're adapting to our behaviors just as much. And that's true for me anyway. For predators, the predators have definitely figured it out. And when I'm talking about predators, the main one that I'm dealing with are corvids with my listed species, as being egg thieves and so on like that. And so just continues to be a head scratcher as how best to deal with these birds that are seem to be adapting better than we are. They're adapting to us better than we're adapting to them. So.
Yeah, one other implication that might be a little specific to our installation, since we are our entire installation is on BLM land for the most part, and so we are publicly accessible. But that implication of increased use of power lines and roads, we just collaborated on a study of surveying power lines for carcasses of, well, any bird, but particularly raptors, and those power line corridors with nice roads underneath. We found the most amount of our illegally shot species. And so that's a concern for us, and just understanding when those spatial temporal timelines start to stack up on top of each other for increased, looking out for that type of activity. I think that's really, really helpful.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, Zoe. I mean, when I was working in southern Idaho there, adjacent to you, we certainly had a lot of, well, we would encounter a lot of eagles that died along power lines, and a lot of them were shot. So that is a really important implication, at least for enforcement, right? Try to figure out, when these are getting shot. Probably more likely to get shot during the winter when they're using these features more.
Keely added in the chat, high uses of power line corridors means there's also an increased importance in having an avian protection plan and making sure you're mitigating things like electrocution risk. That's a good point.
One of the, I don't know how valuable this is, but talking about the avian protection plan, one of the things that we didn't take into consideration when we developed ours, I don't think effectively enough, was the risk of collision. Our main collision factor is on the coast. We get some periods of very dense fog, and we get a lot of our collisions in those real foggy mornings, and it seems it really takes its toll on the birds that don't have good maneuverability, that basically can't do a quick course correction. So rails, coots, all those ones that are, we kind of lump them into the clumsy flyer guild. They definitely take a beating on those foggy nights. And it's something that when we update our plan, one of the things that I want to try, and I don't know if anybody can speak to this, if they've done anything, if anybody's tried anything with to make lines more visible. I've seen some pilot studies and so on with reflectors and so on like that. But has anybody had any success with reducing collision through some sort of some kind of markings or anything that anybody's tried that's worked?
Hi, Bob. My name is Teresa Galehood. I'm new to DoD, but I did work on a project on Kauai in Hawaii, trying to mitigate the amount of collisions that we had seabirds running into power lines, especially in poor weather. And we had diverters that were both reflective and had a solar power LED light attached to them. And although it's not useful in every situation because the LED lights can affect airport ops or can affect drivers if it's near a road. We did see something like an 80 to 90% reduction in collisions with those particular diverters.
Wow, that's staggering. Yeah, Martin says, Martin Rand, he said, we've used reflective flappers at Point Magoo, which has reduced brown pelican power strikes by 90%.
Martin, you're hiding that good information from me. I got to talk to you about that.
Bob, if you didn't have anything else.
I have one more thing.
Oh yeah, Jackie, go ahead.
Bob's going to slap me on the wrist for bringing up DoD PIP again. He wanted to keep this very, very NMFWA centric because we're going to have that meeting here in a little bit. But for those of you that are not going to be in that meeting for one reason or another, DoD PIP has developed a mission sensitive species list, and a lot of work went into it, and it does take into consideration the species impact on military training and as well as a variety of other things. And so it's not available on the website yet. And they are going to be sending it out on the listserv. So if you're not on the listserv, make sure that you join so that you don't miss out on that information. I think it'll help a lot of people with the prioritization of monitoring at-risk species. And that's all I have. Thank you, everybody. Y'all are awesome. Thank you, Bob. Bob did most of the legwork to make this successful. I just showed up, so he's awesome. Thank you, everybody.
So we've got just a couple minutes left, and I want to definitely encourage everyone who has the ability in their schedule to slide over to the DoD PIF presentation, which is it butts right up against this one. So you can grab a quick cup of coffee and join that one. But another plug, if I can, for the files and polls section in this workshop. Make sure that you go, and the most important one for me is to make sure that you vote for the next co-chair, but then I'm also interested in those two other polls. And then those files are there for your interest. The other file that I put up there that was interesting, I was in a free-ranging cat presentation that was done by AFWA yesterday, and they shared a toolkit that they had put together to address free-ranging domestic cats, and I thought that was it's a good product, and it might be of use for those of you who have issues with free-ranging cats on your installation. So please take a look at those files there in a toolkit. I don't know if there's any other by the ways or last moments, but open it up.
Yeah, I just had one. Raymond at the beginning of the session asked a question about Modus towers. And I'm sure that we could probably go on for a while about who's using Modus and in what fashion and where. But he included his email, which I put in that chat. So if it sounds like he's interested in some information about Modus, and then which I am too. So maybe CC me on that. And we have about 5 minutes, but I wanted to give Alan a chance to answer a question about the survey and that spreadsheet that you guys had put at the beginning. The question was, are the installation training impacts intended to only highlight activities expected to negatively impact mission sensitive species, as opposed to a comprehensive list of activities that occur? Rich did provide a DoD PIF perspective, which sounds like they'll talk about a little bit more in that meeting, but I don't know if Alan or Bob, you wanted to address that question.
No. I got out it.
I think honestly, I think I would just go through. I mean, with the way that I looked at that spreadsheet is, and when you look at it closely, it has ranked issues like the ones that are the high, low, and or high, medium, and low concerns from bird conservation point of view. So I would say just do your best when you go through that and answer it. If you have particular additional questions, by all means, reach out to us, and we can help kind of guide you if you need that. We're just a couple minutes from wrapping up, so I wanted to take this opportunity to thank both Zoe and Jackie for helping me co-moderate this. And helping me drive the bus. As I told Zoe this morning, I've been riding in this bus comfortably for the last couple of days, but this is the first time I've had to actually drive it. So I appreciate your help in helping me get through that and through the technical stuff. And then also wanted to thank our panel members, Robert, John, Charlie, Steve, and Pete for your time and your insight and thoughtful responses. And again, a plug for anybody who hasn't had a chance to go look at their presentations for whatever reason, they will be up on the Pathables website for quite a while. So please take the opportunity to go check those out. They're very well done presentations. And with that, I'll unless there's any by the ways, I'll bid adieu.
I was gonna put just one last plug if I can find it. I'll put if you haven't seen it yet, the working group. Here it is. Working group link in the chat if you wanted to join the bird conservation working group.
All right. Thank you all for your time, everyone. I appreciate your participation and enjoyed my time as a co-chair. I'm not going anywhere. I'll still be around, but we're ready to hand that off to the next person. You'll see an email coming out shortly about the results of that. Thank you all so much. Have a great day.
Hey, Bob, it's Alan. If people don't get off, the intention of that survey was for the impacts on mission sensitive species. So to answer that question.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, thanks everybody.
So I was going to say, Bob, I was kind of keeping track of participation. And looks like for the most part, the bulk of the session, we had up to 183 people.
That's awesome.
It is awesome.
Awesome. Cool. And I didn't say any bad words and I didn't show off my underwear. So it's all good. So yeah.
Oh yeah, that reminds me. Maybe I should stop the recording.
You're still on the session now, you know.